Alright, what's up? It's August 26, 2019, and today we're going to go over some more psychology, sociology flashcards. So we're just going to get started. Hansel General Adaptation Syndrome. The alarm phase is just the it's part of the phase when you are, it's a tip of my tongue. The alarm phase. The stress reaction kicks in. Or damaging effects of stress raises blood pressure, so causes stuff like hypertension and coronary heart disease. Piaget argues that children thought a certain way, and thus they create language to describe this certain way of thinking. Areas processed in the Wernicke-Broca's area, which is in the frontal lobe of the brain, and it's used for like speech production and actually, talking. While Wernicke's area is in the temporal lobe of the brain and is used for understanding speech. For visual cues, color, or depth, form, motion, constancy. Depth, color, form, constancy. DPVF. Depth, color, form, motion. Depth, color, form, motion, constancy. One of those aren't it. Depth, I know depth is it. Constancy is it. For motion. Yep, depth, form, motion, constancy. Linguistic universal theory argues that all languages share similar characteristics. The Hansel general adaptation states that there are three stages of stress. The first stage is the alarm phase. The second stage is the resistance phase, and the third phase is exhaustion. Post-acute withdrawal usually lasts for 2 years. The choroid's a network of blood vessels that nourishes the retina, and it's pigmented black because it absorbs all wavelengths of light. What happens when the retinal changes conformation? The transducin will break off, and that will initiate a phototransduction cascade. Rhodopsin changes shape, and the phototransduction cascade can begin. The cortex receives info from the cochlea is the primary auditory cortex, and it falls under the temporal lobe. Conjunction fallacy states that we often believe to occurrence of an event. So for some people, actually for most people, we tend to believe that there exists a feminist bank teller rather than just a bank teller alone. Resistance phase, no idea. It's brand new. Fleeing, huddling, temperature elevation, high cortisol. Fleeing, huddling, temperature elevation, high cortisol. Trichromatic theory of color states that there are three colors: red, green, blue, and red, green, blue. Cones that are receptive to three colors. Cones are receptive to green, blue, RGB, and these colors are necessary to see all other colors. The Vygotsky, so remember Vygotsky was a social guy for language development. And so he thinks that children, through operant conditioning, learn language because they get positive reinforcement when they say words. Okay, no, that was a different one. So there's a couple of them. Social factors and biological factors. Oh, okay. Social factors and biological interactively motivates them. Socially communicate them, motivate them to learn language. Resistance phase, fleeing, huddling, high temperature, high levels of cortisol. Optic chiasm is a point where both the optic nerves from both eyes reaches, so left visual field go to the right side, right visual field go to the left side of the brain. Which system? Vomeronasal system made up of basal and apical cells, which contain receptors at the tips. Stress on our metabolism. I don't remember. Body secretes cortisol and glucagon. Stress body secretes cortisol and glucagon. Glucagon will cause glycogen to release glucose, which will cause too much blood sugar. Body secretes cortisol and glucagon. Glucagon will cause glycogen to release glucose, which will cause too much blood sugar. Or optic disc. These are structures found within rods that will trigger action potential. Human ear goes, so path of sound goes from the pinna to the auditory canal to the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. 12 plus years is the formal operational stage. This is when they can think critically and they're just at the peak performance of thinking and thought. They can reason. External outer ear, pinnace to the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. Middle ear goes from the malleus to the stapes, which make up the three ossicles, and the inner ear includes the cochlea, which is the semicircular canal, and the cochlea and semicircular canal. Three types of nerve fibers: A nerve fibers, B nerve fiber, alpha, and C nerve fibers. A beta, A delta, and C fibers. Or damaging effects of stress hormones. So when we're stressed, we release cortisol and glucagon will secrete glycogen into the bloodstream, which increases blood sugar level. What is autobiographical memory? Autobiographical memory it's just a way of memorizing and trying to relate how stuff. Oh no, autobiographical memory is made up of episodic memories, I think. Consisting of episodes recollected from individualized based on episodic and semantic memory. Howard Gardner's theory of intelligence, we have 7 intelligence, or was it 9? I think it was 9. 9 forms of intelligence, and one intelligence doesn't dictate your intelligence in another intelligence. Independent. Yep. What is a modified semantic network? States that a semantic network can vary from individual to individual and are unique based on our experiences. What is a spindle? These are proteins located in muscles that are sensitive to stretching. So when it allows us to have an idea of how stretch and how stretch our muscles are, which is basically proprioception. Receptors looking at muscles. Yeah, basically. What is a global aphasia? Global aphasia. This is when there's issues with it's Wernicke aphasia plus Broca's aphasia combined, so you're just unable to speak and unable to understand language. How does stress damage our reproductive system? During stress, women reproduction gets shut down by reduction in FSH and LH. During stress in men, you get reduced testosterone and erectile. Reproduction gets shut down. In women, reduction FSH and LH, so reproduction gets shut down. During stress in men, you get reduced testosterone and erectile dysfunction. The longer distance between nodes, or more nodes in between, the longer the distance, the less connected ideas are, or longer it takes to verify the connection. What do on the sensory cortex and the parietal lobe? Clear start and end goals. Retrograde memory is the ability to remember previous information before brain injury. Anterior memory is the ability to form long-term memory after brain injury. The stapes will vibrate back and forth to push a lip to window at the same frequency. The stapes vibrates at the same frequency as a stimulus, which shifts the elliptical window back and forth. No, The effect could cause autoinflammation and inhibits immune system activation in response to pathogens. Autoinflammation and inhibits immune system activation in response to pathogens. Attentional capture. This is stimuluses or objects that catch our attention. Occurs when attention is attracted by motion. How does stress damage our reproduction? So in women, you get decreased FSH and LH, which stops or reduces reproduction, and in men, you get erectile dysfunction and lower levels of testosterone. Alarm phase is when the stress reaction kicks in. C fibers are slow, unmyelinated, and small diameter. Louis Terman was a psychologist in Stanford, which took the Binet intelligence test and made the first general intelligence test given to adults, kids, and teens. Which two areas of our brain has the most glucocorticoid? Hippocampus and frontal cortex. Hippocampus and frontal cortex are the two areas of our brain with the most glucocorticoid receptors. Hippocampus and frontal cortex. How can stress damage our immune function? Causes autoinflammation and reduces immune system activation against pathogen. First, you have a central executive, which is a component of working memory that combines visual store memory in the episodic buffer to move into long-term memory in the hippocampus. Ray from left visual field hits the nasal side of the left eye and the temporal side of the right eye, while ray of light from the right visual field will hit the nasal side of the right eye and hits the temporal side of the left eye. Substance use disorder is when you notice that they have increased craving and they have strong withdrawal symptoms, and it's like they don't get the same level of high. They require a higher dosage to gain the same level of high. So high amount, high recovery time. High amounts, high recovery time, withdrawal symptoms. Which two areas of our brain has the most glucose? I think it was the hippocampus and the frontal cortex. Yeah. One of the major emotional response of stress is depression. What happens with retinal changes conformation? Rods will change shape, and that initiates a phototransduction assay. Rhodopsin. Causes increase in blood pressure, which can cause hypertension or coronary heart disease. Opiates are natural, so morphine and codeine. Information processing assumes that our brains have a limited storage capacity in serial processing. However, the human brain still has a capacity for parallel processing. Assumes limited storage capacity in serial processing. However, the human brain has capacity for parallel processing. Three main routes are oral, inhalation, and injection. Injection including transdermal and intramuscular. Main symptom of depression is anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure, so you perceive more stress. Depression is anhedonia, which is the inability to experience pleasure, so you inability to experience pleasure, so you see more stress. Anhedonia. Trichromatic theory of color states that our cones are responsive to RGB, which is red, green, blue, and we simply mix colors to perceive other colors. Weak linguistic determinism states that weak linguistic determinism states that language dictates thought on some level. So, for example, in the English language, we tend to read left to right. So when we tell someone that, or we ask someone to draw out a girl picking up a ball, they'll draw the girl on the left side picking up the ball on the right side. What is the interactionist approach? Vygotsky. Interactionist. So Vygotsky was a social guide to language development. So he says that children's learning language is due to sociological and biological factors. Children are motivated to communicate with adults, and that's the driving force that allows them to pick up language. So molecules will come in and bind to basal and apical cells, which will cause it. They bind to GPCR, G protein co-receptors, and G protein. This also go to G protein ion channels, which will cause an influx of ions into the cell, which triggers action potential to the glomerulus, which contains mutual toughness cells, and those will send signals to the amygdala of the brain. Main symptom is called, oh man, I forgot the word. Encephonia? It's a new word. Basically, inability to experience pleasure, so they perceive more stressors. Anhedonia. Resistance phase. This is part of the Hans cell general adaptation syndrome, and the resistance phase is I think the resistance phase is when you're come on. Increased blood pressure? No. Resistance phase. I forgot it. High cortisol. Fleeing, huddling, temperature elevation, and high cortisol. Fleeing, huddling, temperature elevation, high cortisol. Alpha, beta, alpha, delta, and C. And those, change within your surroundings. So, an example they gave was that if you're coming home and you notice that your wife, or you don't notice that your wife has a new haircut. Autobiographic memory is a system for recalling episodes within your life, and it relies on episodic memory and semantic memory. What is the damaging effect of stress on our metabolism? So stress will release cortisol and glucagon, and glucagon will cause the secretion of glucose into the bloodstream, which raises blood sugar. Motivational interviewing. This is a step to fix people who are addicted to drugs, and they will try to get you to acknowledge that you have a drug problem. Motivational interviewing. This is when trying to find the intrinsic reason why people get addicted to drugs. Constipation to get other treatments for cognitive behavioral therapy. Resistance phase. This is when the skin temperature increases, and you also secrete higher levels of cortisol. Fleeing, huddling. I don't know why you call it resistance phase. You're fleeing from it, huddling, temperature elevation, cortisol. What happens when the siblings push back and forth? So the endolymph contains lots of potassium. So potassium is going to enter the cell, which activates calcium channels. So calcium also flows into the cell and ultimately triggers action potential. The longer distance between nodes or more nodes in between, the longer it takes to verify connection between two nodes. Which nerve fiber connects to Wernicke? The accurin fasciculus nerve fiber connects both the Wernicke and Broca's area. She also found deaf people who know some. What is Gisselt's law of grouping? It's just it's a law that tries to understand how we perceive certain things. The role of rhodopsin in a transduction cascade. Some of the light will hit the rods and it'll hit rhodopsin, which causes a retinal to pop off, and the retinal will change shape. I think it's like from cis to trans, which activates a phototransduction cascade. Rhodopsin and causes the retinal, which is a molecule inside rhodopsin, to change from bent to straight. Resistance phase. This is huddling, fleeing, temperature elevation, and high levels of cortisol. Again, that is high temperature elevation, high levels of cortisol, huddling, and fleeing for resistance phase. Attentional capture. This is when we are driven to attention by an object in motion. Stress in women will stop reproductive because they decrease levels of FSH and LH. In men, they get reduced testosterone and erectile dysfunction. Accessory epithelium does what? Should be accessory. It contains basal and apical cells that contains receptors, so it sends neural impulses to the accessory bulb at the meatrial and tufted cells. Yeah. What is an olfactory bulb? It's a location area containing the glomerulus, which is the meatrial tufted cells inside above the cribriform plate, which is above the olfactory epithelium. Okay, that's also bundle of nerves that sends protection through the cribriform plate into the olfactory epithelium. What is circadian body's natural rhythm? In 24-hour period, what chemicals control circadian rhythm, and where is the chemical that controls circadian is melatonin, and it's secreted from the it's one of the glands. Melatonin is secreted from the was it the pineal gland? Pineal gland. Yeah. Melatonin controls the answer from the pineal gland. Cool. Hard though. How does stress damage our immune function? So it causes autoinflammation and causes our immune system to be less effective against pathogens. For most people, language is in which hemisphere? Left hemisphere. Left hand. How do you know when someone has a substance use disorder? So you know when someone has a substance use disorder when you notice that they take high dosage, they have high recovery time, and they have withdrawal symptoms. When the oval window gets vibrated, it shifts the endolymphs back. It shifts the endolymphs inside the cochlea against hair cells with trigger action potentials. What is the pathway of sound for cochlear impulse? So it goes from the microphone to the receiver to the transmitter to the stimulator to the cochlea, which converts it to an electrical impulse into the brain. Neural impulse. Empty card. Wonderful. People with sleep deprivation tend to be more irritable, have poor memory and attention, and more prone to obesity. Yeah, I don't know why this card. Oh, I think maybe that's why. What are some examples of opiates? Opiates are natural, and some examples of opiates are morphine and codeine. The information processing assumes our brain has limited capacity. We do serial processing, even though some evidence has shown that brains do parallel processing too. Cognitive behavioral therapy are long-lasting, teaches you positive thoughts, coping behavior, and to identify risky situations, and to control cravings. Memories that decline as you grow older include your episodic memory, your processing speed, divided attention becomes harder, and your prospective memory, which is doing something in the future. One is contralateral organization. Contralateral is basically left visual field goes to the right hemisphere, right visual field goes to the left hemisphere of the brain. One of the major emotional responses is depression. Hippocampus and frontal cortex has the most glucocorticoid receptors. The structure located near the striatum of the brain and contains structures like the nucleus, the nucleus bacillus, nucleus accumbens, and medial septonuclei, all important for the production of acetylcholine, which is important for orienting attention. Collection of structures located near the striatum of the brain includes nucleus accumbens, nucleus bacillus, medial septonuclei, correct, all important for the production of acetylcholine, which is required for orienting attention. Hard. What happens when the retinal changes conformation? If the retinal changes conformation, then rhodopsin will change shape, which will initiate a phototransduction cascade. And coding specificity states that we tend to have better recalling ability, better memory when we take tests, for example, in the same condition as learning. Enhanced memory. Executive attention is picking what you want to pay attention to, controlled by dopamine secreted from the VTA. Exhaustion, no idea. Our body stress response are depleted and our tissue damage, negative impacts of long-term stress. Our bodies aren't equipped to handle long-term stress. Okay, exhaustion. Our body stress resources are depleted and our tissues are damaged. This is due to long-term our body's not equipped to handle. So tissue damage and stress resources are depleted. Basically, long-term stress is bad for our body because we're not designed to handle it. So resource depleted and tissues damaged. How does a molecule bind to olfactory sensory cells and cause action potential? So yeah, they bind to GPCR, G protein coupled receptors inside olfactory sensory cells, which will cause the G protein to dissociate, bind to a G protein ion channel, causes an influx of positive ions, which causes action potential in the olfactory sensory cell. Semantic networks are ways we organize concept ideas. Connected ideas are connected closely to each other in our semantic network. A lexicon is a list of vocab words in a language. Or early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, short-term memory loss, inability to recall recent events. Biological reason for depression, no idea. Anterior cingulate, which is in the anterior part of the frontal, serotonin. The anterior cingulate near in the front of the frontal cortex. Stop responding to serotonin. Anterior cingulate, which is in the anterior part of the frontal cortex, will stop responding to serotonin. Exhaustion, this is when our body's stress resources are depleted and body resources are depleted and tissues get damaged because our bodies aren't designed to deal with long-term stress. 7 to 11 years is called the stable operational stage, and 7 to 11 years is when children development. I know it's called stable. I think it's when they start learning about conservation. So if you give them a glass of water and you pour into a glass of water, they'll be able to tell you that they have the same amount of water. That was called concrete, not stable. Okay, reason mathematics and understand. Okay, conservation and reason mathematics. Concrete operational stage. Piaget's. Okay. Main symptom of depression is, anisophonia is basically where you're unable to experience pleasure, so you perceive more stressors. Anhedonia. How can I remember that? Anhedonia. Main symptom is anhedonia. Motivational needs to find intrinsic reasons to change can lead to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Biological reason for depression is that you have the anterior cingulate, which is in the anterior part of your frontal cortex, so the front of the cortex stops responding to serotonin. Autobiographical memory is a memory system where we remember episodes within our life, which is based on episodic memory and semantic memory. The amygdala is involved in many things. It's involved in hunger, sex, drive, anger, sex, yeah. And the temporal lobe is also involved in memory consolidation and decision making. It's also involved in a number of other things. Emotion, aggression, mating, yeah. Representative heuristics is just a type of problem-solving heuristic in which it's kind of like stereotyping, finding what's representative of a certain object based on our knowledge. So, like if we see an Asian boy, some stereotypical people might be like, "Oh, Asian boy, glasses, nerdy, and all that stuff." Sort of, so we guess we're going to what people represent to stereotypical people. Yeah. What is the role of rhodopsin? Rhodopsin in infotrophism. So remember that when light hits, some of the light will hit rhodopsin, which causes a retinal to break off, and the retinal would change from bent to straight. Main symptom of depression is ansiphonia, which is the inability to experience pleasure, in which you perceive more stressors in life. Anhedonia. Resistance phase is fleeing, huddling, increase in temperature, increase in cortisol. And learning behaviors, B.F. Skinner states that children learn language based on operant conditioning, in which they get positive reinforcement for learning a new word in a language. Olfactory bulb is a accessory olfactory bulb located above the cribriform plate that sends projections through the cribriform plate into the olfactory epithelium. Orienting attention is when you shift attention from one object to another object, driven by acetylcholine secreted from the basal forebrain. Learned helplessness. It's like you learn from having control ripped out of your hands so that you don't have. So you lose the ability to identify coping mechanisms. You learn from having control ripping out of your hands that you don't have control. You lose the ability to identify coping. Okay, this one's. You learn from having control ripped out of your hands that you don't have control. So you lose the ability to identify coping mechanisms. Okay. Learn helplessness. You lose the ability to identify coping mechanisms because you learn based on past experience that when you have control ripped out of your hands, that you learn from having control ripped out of your hands that you don't have control, and thus you are less likely to have a coping mechanism. Okay. Main symptoms of depression is ansiphonia, in which you're unable to receive pleasure, so you perceive more stressors. Anhedonia. What is the main symptom of depression? Is anhedonia, in which you're unable to perceive pleasure, so you perceive more stress. How are symptoms of alcohol withdrawals alleviated? Alcohol withdrawals can be alleviated by using benzodiazepines. Empty curd. So people with sleep tend to be more irritable, have poor memory and attention, and are more prone to obesity. What is vigilance attention? It's basically the priming to allow for faster response to stimulus. What are the 3 emotional behavioral effects of stress? No idea. Anger, anxiety, and addiction are 3 emotional behavioral effects of stress. Anger, anxiety, and addiction. Lexical access. This is pairing a vocabulary word with some sort of meaning that you have in your knowledge. What is learned helpless? You learn from having control ripped out of your hands that you basically don't have control, and so you're unable to identify coping mechanisms. What is the role of the hypothalamus in the limbic system? So the hypothalamus is responsible for regulating the autonomic nervous system, the endocrine system, hunger, sleep, sex, all that stuff. What is the main symptom of depression? Anhedonia, in which you're unable to perceive pleasures, so you perceive more stressors. Anhedonia. Okay, I'm going to say it. What is the Meyer-Friedman-Ray Rosenman experiment? No idea. This notion that stress is associated with increased heart disease. The Meyer-Friedman and Ray Rosenman experiment. They test the notion that stress is associated with increased heart disease. People who had heart disease were mostly angry. Interesting. The emotional behavior of anger, anxiety, and I don't know angry. It's like 3 A's. Anger, anxiety, addiction. Anger, anxiety, and addiction. Dual coding hypothesis states that it's easier to learn a word associated with an image rather than each one alone. Linguistic determinism. Language dictates thoughts. Weak linguistic determinism, which is relativism, and strong linguistic determinism, which is the Dworkian hypothesis. Which types of memories or habits are implicit memory, stored specifically procedural memory, and stored in the basal ganglia. The emotional behavioral effect of stress is anxiety, which centers on the amygdala. Sleep spindles and K complexes, they're part of the N2 sleep theory and just keep you asleep. Sleep spindles increase random bursts of random brain activity, while K complexes suppress cortical arousal and memory consolidation. What is the limbic system? The limbic system is a system that we use for emotions. Substructure, okay, I forgot hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and thalamus. Hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and thalamus. What is the Meyer-Friedman-Ray Rosenman experiment? Friedman. So they basically they basically tried to figure out if there's a connection between heart diseases and stress, and they found out that people who had heart diseases tended to be more angry. Anger, anxiety, and stress. I don't know, it's 3 emotional. Anger, anxiety, anger, anxiety, addiction. Addiction. When you're stressed, you're addicted to drugs. All right. Emotional behavioral effect of stress and anxiety, which centers in the amygdala. 16 involve emotion: happiness, sadness, fear, surprise, disgust, anger. 5 components of language: phonology, morphology, semantics, syntax, pragmatics. What is the role of the thalamus in the limbic system? The thalamus is thalamus. Forgot. Okay, thalamus is a sensory relay station. Direct sensory senses into the areas of cortex and areas of brain. Smell is the only sense that bypasses the thalamus. Is that the pathway of a molecule? It comes in to describe the pathway. Okay, so when benzene comes in through the nose, it binds to basal optical cells in the olfactory epithelium through GPCR. Those will send projections through the cribriform plate into the accessory olfactory bulb to the glomerulus, which contains nucleotide cells, which then signals the amygdala. Alright, so that's been about 40 minutes or so I'm going to take a small break and we'll get right back into it.